How did the actual plot for 9/11, in its details, the hijacking of planes, the use of planes as weapons, the attacks on these important symbolic American targets, take us through the logic that led to that, particularly this idea of using planes as weapons?
Well, you know, there are several different influences that came together, but the main line was, you recall that the World Trade Center was bombed in 1993 by Ramzi Youssef, and his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, were together in the Philippines. And they were loosely coordinating some of their ideas with bin Laden off in Afghanistan. But it was those two who came up with the idea of kidnapping, hijacking a bunch of American planes. Their idea was that they would hijack these planes in Asia. And as they're crossing the Pacific, they would systematically go through, kill all the men. Then one of the planes would be piloted by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed himself, and he would land the plane in the United States and then declare what he had done and why he had done it, and then kill himself. This was the plan. Now, he went to bin Laden with this idea, I think, you know, mainly appealing to bin Laden as a financier. And bin Laden told him, "It's interesting, but it wasn't quite worked out." But this seed began to germinate inside the Al-Qaeda camps, and they were thinking a lot about it. They began to try to get recruits who could learn how to fly, and as it happened, you know, there was a young Saudi recruit who came in, had studied flying, but his English was really terrible, and there were a couple of other Saudis that they thought they could get to America and have them study how to fly, but they couldn't speak English at all. So they were at loose ends when into the camp came 4 young Arabs who happened to be studying in Hamburg. And they had great skills. Their language skills were very impressive. Muhammad Atta, clearly the most commanding of the 4, was a civil engineer. He, very strict, very disciplined. And within a few days of their arrival, they were called in to meet with bin Laden, who sort of took in, praised them, and then they were settled on having these young men be the leaders of 9/11. They would be the ones who would have the skills to go actually learn how to fly, to be able to speak English inside America. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed tutored them on how to behave, what to expect inside America, how to find the places to train for flying and so on. And that's how that project began to mature. And I think, to some extent, once engaged in it, Muhammad Atta became a co-equal in the planning of it, because he was the man on the ground, and he saw how things were really going to work. And once he got put into play, I think a lot of the imagination was his.
You describe in the book Al-Qaeda's organizational structure as being based on a premise of sort of broad guidance coming from the central organization, but the actual implementation of the details being decentralized.
Right.
Is that how the 9/11 attack evolved?
In many ways. I mean, these were young guys who came to America with a generalized idea that they were going to, learn how to fly passenger planes, and they were going to use them as missiles. That was, they didn't really clearly have the targets set out. There was a lot of time spent thinking about targets. But while they were here, they were still toying with the idea that maybe we would rent crop dusters and spread anthrax over a stadium or something like that. So they looked at the idea of hitting a nuclear plant. There were, the plan was still inchoate when they arrived in America. And as they stayed here, it began to settle into its form. And the highly symbolic choices that they made about the center of world trade, the center of American political power, and the center of American defense power, I think that those thoughts may have come from Muhammad Atta.
So not necessarily from bin Laden or Zawahiri.
What gives me that feeling is that you see these guys, the hijackers in America, still thinking about targeting. And they obviously had the authority to consider, you know, what they wanted to do on the ground. Not saying there wasn't influence coming back and forth, because bin Laden was fully apprised of what the targets were when he finally approved them. But I think that there was a dialogue going on.